Okay, I don't want to get too far behind for lunch, as I said, so we're going to start the next panel. And the leader of the philosophers at the Air Force Academy, Jim Cook, is going to introduce them. And thanks, Jim, for being part of this.
Thanks, Ed. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back. We're getting really close to lunchtime. Because we're running a little over, I'll be very brief in the introductions. We have 3 members from the Air Force Academy and one treasured member of a sister academy, the Coast Guard. Let me do the Air Force introductions first. We have Dr. Colonel Retired Tom Torkelson, who is the Deputy Director of what we call the Center for Character and Leadership Development. Like all of the people here, he is both a theoretician as well as somebody who does practical work. He has a long and very nice career in the U.S. Air Force, including wing command of a very famous unit, the 100th, in Mildenhall. And my recollection is that during World War II, it was B-17s. It was called the Bloody 100th because of losses that bloody should fall out for a refueling wing. And you've had a lot of combat hours, 300, among thousands of regular, 4,000 plus regular flying hours. So there's our deputy director, and working with him are 2 brilliant assessment experts, numbers ninjas. I'm jumping over you, John. And they are Adam Silver and Sarah Wilk.
Wylie.
Oh, okay, Wylie, that's good. Here it says Wilk, so if you've changed your name, I'm cool with that. And sorry, my mistake. And as well, John Heller, who has the director's role of the Admiral James M. Loy Institute for Leadership. And again, this is the center of character development, both theoretical and practical. So I'm delighted that we have them here, and I'm honored to introduce you and looking forward to what you say.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of Colonel Kernt Wendt, who is our director, it's an honor to be here at the McCain conference for me for the very first time. I love savoring the name Senator John McCain. We're all a fan of his character and the legacy that he leaves. I got to go to the Hanoi Hilton in 2006. And when I was at that location, some of the stories that he and Admiral Stockdale and others have shared with us came to life for me. And so it's a real honor and privilege to be here. I also want to say that I haven't been to Annapolis since 1989 for when I came for the Air Force and Navy football game. It's been a while. I was a cadet back then. I'm class of 92, True Blue from the Academy. But I come from a Navy family. And so my step-grandfather is class of 27 at Annapolis. I learned late in life that he was a pioneer for naval aviation. He was the captain of an Essex-class aircraft carrier, the USS Princeton, in the Korean War. I wish I had learned more of his Operation Torch stories from World War II as well. He was kind of a great Santini grandfather, and if you don't know the reference, we'll talk about it on a sidebar. But he was a great aviator and patriot. His son, my stepfather, was a black sheep of the family and joined the Air Force. He went to UVA. And it was kind of the butt of Grandpa's jokes the rest of the time. But his 2 younger brothers, my uncles, are both Annapolis grads as well. So even though I became an airman and my stepdad was an airman, I feel like I come from a Navy family, lived in Virginia Beach for a very long time, and it's an honor to be here. Oh, wrong button. So Jim gave us a nice introduction. I did have an operational career, and at the expense of alienating myself from the PhDs and the doctors in the room, I don't consider myself an academic, at least not yet. I had an operational career, and as I was in those command jobs, we had a mission to do. And so in my world, it was getting a tanker at an air refueling control point to give gas to a bomb dropper, a missile shooter, something like that. And we talked about values, integrity, service, excellence, the Air Force core values, kind of as we could. We all agreed that it was important, but in command, it was as we had time. And so coming to the Air Force Academy and learning about the Center for Character and Leadership Development, and all of our academies in general are about producing leaders of character, it was super refreshing to go to a place where that's the mission. The mission now is to develop leaders of character. So at the Center for Character and Leadership Development, that's our mission and vision. And I want to call it Polaris Hall a little bit too, because our organizational structure is different from the other academies. And so on this last bullet, we are a headquarters directorate now reporting directly to the superintendent, whereas at Naval Academy it's a little bit different, it's a little more bifurcated, and even at West Point there's two, I would say, centers of activity as it relates to character and leadership development. And so the building was completed in 2016, and that unification of many different character development activities at the Academy, I think, helped us gain some synergies and produce some economies of scale, and it's a tremendous visual reminder at our institution that character development is important. It's about 50% donor funded, and so we have a huge grad community that thinks it's important to have this visual reminder of what character development means. A lot of you know that the oculus at the top of Polaris Hall points to the North Star, which in our secular world is supposed to represent our moral compass. And when someone violates the honor code and it goes all the way to an honor board, unfortunately the cadet in the hot seat sits in a seat that's aligned with that oculus to remind them that their behavior has been out of alignment with our values. And so there's some conversation about maybe flipping the script on the role of that seat to make it more positive and aspirational, but as it stands, Polaris is a great representation of the unification of the mission at the Academy. Our organization in 2018 to report to the superintendent happened then. And since then, we've gained a lot of momentum. That my very last slide, I only have 9 slides. And so the colonel from the Royal Navy before me talked about 26 slides in 22 minutes. I have 9, and I've asked Jim to be really keeping me on to task on time. So on the last slide, when we talk about commitment of character development at the Academy, I'll reinforce that message there. All right. So General Miller talked about this briefly yesterday. He showed this slide, and when we talk about developing a leader of a character, it's this as the product. 3 main pillars: someone who lives honorably, lifts others, and elevates performance. And as we go through these next 2 slides, this is the output of the framework. The next slide is the leader of character framework. You're going to see a lot of connections and parallels to what we talked about yesterday, and I'll try to call some of them out, but you all are an attentive audience, and I'm sure you'll make a lot of the connections yourself. But someone who lives honorably, in our estimation, is someone who practices habitually our core values: integrity first, service before self, and excellence in all we do. There's a list of virtues at the bottom of that column that are important to us that we use to expand upon and make those ideas more operational. But that's what we mean when we say live honorably. And we do our best to try to separate it from the honor code. And this is a good time to talk about our relationship there. And I think it was Dr. Brooks yesterday talked about the aspirational. And so I was talking to some cadets and midshipmen during a break, and we talked about our honor code. And in my opinion, at the Academy, the code has kind of disproportionate power over how we talk about honor. It was first. It came in 1955 as part of the first class of 1959, and it's a whole bunch of do nots. We will not lie, steal, or cheat, nor tolerate among us anyone who does. And in my opinion, that's a low bar for character. But back in the day, if you talk about from someone from an older generation, I know there's some 62 grads from Annapolis in the audience, it was sufficient for them. The code was enough. But over time, it's become such a legalized process with such an idea that we're kind of looking over our shoulder. I will tell you, Cadet Torkelson viewed that just very short laundry list of do-nots to imply I can do everything else. And I kind of lived that way. As long as I didn't lie, steal, or cheat, anything else was on the table. And the Center for Character and Leadership Development didn't exist in my day. It was born in 1993. I graduated in 92. But there was still character and leadership development going on at the Academy, but I just really wasn't a participant. So this kinds of language is trying to flip the, I would say, more oppressive honor code do-nots into something more aspirational. This is what good looks like. This is what a leader of character looks like. And we're hoping that this kind of conversation, this kind of verbiage trumps the decades of institutional inertia associated with the code. So to continue that, someone who lifts others. And so we learned yesterday that either we're quoting Ted Lasso to their best possible selves, or Ted Lasso's quoting us. But I like it because it's not to some arbitrary standard. There are military standards. There are certain physical things that we must accomplish to a minimum standard. But character development shouldn't be one of those. There are standards. We want our standards to be high, but we got to meet people where they are. And we all have different traits of strength, different capabilities, and I think recognition of that is helpful. And then elevating performance towards a noble and common purpose. We've all talked about believing in something bigger than ourselves. It took me a while in my personal journey to get there. I didn't really get it as a cadet, to be honest with you. But this elevating performance towards defense of our Constitution, the spread of democracy, freedom, something that's not you, that's my main message to the cadets and midshipmen. It's not about you. I think a lot of you get it because you signed up for this voluntarily, and you're in that maybe weird 4% that believes character development is super powerful, and I'm glad that you're here. And then the elevating performance is also about the individual. We want to be better tomorrow than we are today, and for the organization, team, and larger organizations. So that's the product, what a leader character does. And here's how we get there. Who's seen this picture before? All right, not very many. So normally when I'm giving like a mission brief to a center to civic leaders or something like this, I don't spend a lot of time on the slide. I say, hey, there's a flow chart there, and I can go all academic on you and get into the details. Today I'm going to spend a little time on the slide because the audience is different, and there should be some interest and some connections to what we talked about yesterday to what exists here. So I just described what's on the right, a leader of character, someone who lives honorably, lifts others, and elevates performance. We think that's enduring. That's a product and an output that should last for decades, if not for the eternity of the academy, probably all of our academies. But the flow chart on the left, in my opinion, should be informed by scholarship, should be refreshed, should be reaffirmed at some kind of frequency. And as I listened to a lot of the comments yesterday, I feel more and more confident that we got a lot of good elements in this framework. And so as we walk through this, tell me if you agree. Own, engage, practice are the main muscle movements that we try to do, and ownership as it relates to identity, in my opinion, is the most important. We talk about you having a growth mindset and a soft heart willing to learn. If a cadet or a midshipman shows up for character development and they don't think they have anywhere to go, there's no room to grow, all of our fantastic content is just going to bounce off their armor and not be received. And so there needs to be a process of ownership. And I'm going to talk to the cadets and midshipmen just for a moment here. We talk often about living a life of integrity, and most of us get taught that integrity is doing the right thing when no one's watching. Have you all heard that? Doing the right thing when no one's watching? Well, later in life, I learned that integer and integrity have the same Latin root, and integer is about being whole. And I would say the integrity message that resonated more for me, I was going to say as a young officer, I'd like to say it was as a cadet, but I didn't get it then, is to live a life of wholeness. And that's really the identity thing that we're trying to get you all to embrace, find your way. You're all 18 to 22-year-olds in general, and you're figuring out who you are and what you want to be. And I think our character and leadership development role in that regard is most impactful, most important as you figure out your identity. And so own that process, own that growth. The academy and you should show up willing to learn for purposeful experiences. This is the engagement portion. The institution has the responsibility to provide some opportunities for you to grow, and then you show up willing to grow as well. Assess, challenge, support is a key departure from where we used to be. This framework existed in parallel with an officer development system that some of you may have heard of with an acronym called PEDO. And the PEDO stood for personal, interpersonal, team, and organization. And the wing, and for a long period of its history, would train and teach personal growth, their 4-degree year, their freshman year, interpersonal, their 3-degree year, team, your junior year, and organization, your senior year. It briefs well, it schedules great across the calendar, but it doesn't meet people where they are. And so we've rejected that model. There's still personal, interpersonal, team, and organizational skills and capabilities we want every graduate to attain and achieve, but they're done in a more variable way under this assess, challenge, support model. And we can talk through that in Q&A if you like. There are still remnants in our course of instruction that talk to PITO across the 4-year experience that we're trying to, if not unwind, at least pepper and reinforce with leader of character words and aspirational conversation. We're trying to use this as a cultural framework to change how we talk about character and leadership development across the academy. Okay, And then practice, habits of thoughts and actions. Dr. Cochran talked about a lot of this yesterday as it relates to Aristotle. The ARDA model, awareness, reasoning, deciding, acting, made me think of the deliberation, judgment, command presentation from yesterday. And then Dr. Miller's comment about when there's a bystander who does something, somebody who acts, there's a tendency for people to follow quickly. That speaks to the decision-action gap as a part of this ARDA model. So let me talk through that a little bit too. Practice in general is all about giving the cadets some repetitions while they're in the leadership laboratory of the academy. And I always use the weapons school, Air Force weapons school, Navy Top Gun as the analogy. We created those environments to give pilots and aviators combat-like experience before they went to combat. Studies showed that if they had about 10 combat sorties under their belt in Vietnam, Korea, that they would be more survivable when they actually continued their combat. So let's make fake combat at weapons school, fake combat, but combat-like at Top Gun, and make them more survivable on their first mission in the AOR. Same kind of idea, give our cadets reps and practice in this leadership laboratory where they should be able to make mistakes and grow along the way before we ask them to do it for real when they're an officer upon graduation. The ARDA model is all about connecting, I would say, head knowledge to hands and activity. If we polled our cadets, it would be close to 100% that they would say sexual assault is wrong, sexual harassment is wrong, racial harassment is wrong. But when they are actually in an environment or an opportunity to see it, do it, witness it, there's some confusion there. There's some misunderstanding of what this action might actually be. And so that's the awareness piece. I often use the burning car at the side of the road as a good example too. As we're driving down the highway and we see a disabled car with flames on it, we have a choice. I'm aware of a moral situation. Do I stop or do I go? Do I have time? Am I going to be inconvenienced? Let's say we stop. Now I'm in the reasoning and deciding portion of this flow. Now I see that there's a person in the car and their body's in danger. Next level, do I engage? Do I put myself at risk? Do I try to pull them out? Again, personal choice, and a lot of times there's no wrong answer here. I'm going to call 911. That's great. Someone may say, I'm going in. This person's in trouble. And so as we neck down that decision-action gap, we want to get to a point of almost simultaneity, instantaneous. I see a problem, I'm going to engage right away. And if we can get to that point in our graduates or young officers, we are now generating those active bystanders, those active leaders who will bring people along the way. The Marvel movie, Captain America, so maybe I'm talking to the younger audience too, but you remember there's so many Marvel movies too, it's hard to keep them all straight. They messed up the timeline, but I'm talking way back for when they're creating Captain America for the very first time, and Steve Rogers, in his very skinny CGI body, is standing there with a bunch of other recruits, all patriots, all vetted, and Tommy Lee Jones throws the grenade, and he jumps on it immediately. Do y'all remember that? And so that's the kind of instantaneous decision-action gap that I think we want our defenders of America to do. And I don't want to debate the chemistry and all of that. There is no biochemical enhancements to our framework. We want it to be self-motivated and the right thing to do. Anyway, that's what we're trying to do as we compress that gap to hopefully down to nothing. All right. Thank you. These next slides are going to go fast because I don't want to take time away from Sarah and Adam, who are going to talk about how we assess some of these things. But here are how we execute the framework across the course of instruction to some degree. This is not all comprehensive. Have you all heard about the National Character and Leadership Symposium? Who has? All right, still a minority. And so what I was surprised to learn, if you don't know what it is, it's an annual event we do at the end of February every year where we bring in a lot of, I would say, sometimes headline speakers, but usually the speakers that make the most impact on our audience are the ones you've never heard of. And so it's an institutionally backed event. Cadets get out of school for one day. It's a 2-day event. Part of it is mandatory. Part of it is optional. There's built-in reflection time. it has grown into a massive event, and I think CCLD was created in '93 just to do this event. So there's some momentum behind it, there's some experience and maturation to this event. It's massive, but what I learned recently is it's the number 3 touted most meaningful character development event for our graduates after basic training and cadet leadership opportunities, whether in basic training or in the squadron. That's surprising to me because it's 2 days, and if you go, let's say, for all 4 years, that's 8 days across your entire environment. It's the number 3 touted event, and I think, like I said, it has some age and legs, but there's some goodness there when we talk about carving out space. It's not necessarily fun, but it can be fun and reflection. So I want to highlight that. These other points we can talk about in Q&A. But I also want to talk about the necessary aspect of heat. And so we have touch points in combat survival training and other summer programs that involve our outdoor leadership complex. And we collaborate often with the Center for Center for Creative Leadership, which has variable places across the country, but it's a Colorado Springs headquarters as well. And they have talked to us about this idea of heat that I think we can relate to. For character development to stick and to grow and to be long-lasting, there needs to be some emotion, some kind of tangible connection to the event. And doing things at altitude, this is about a 55-foot platform. I don't know, when I'm up there, my palms are sweating, my heart is racing. I'm safe. I'm in a harness. I'm not probably going to die, but I feel it. I feel it. And the team building, the ambiguous situations. We'll even tie people's arms up with a balloon and make them do things with one hand. It's a good way to add some heat to their character and leadership development over the summer in particular. We focus on permanent party as well, and there's a long list of, I would say, workshops, experiences that we do in those 3 columns on the right. I want to call out Dr. Jackie Hooper, who's in the audience. She is one of our leads in this regard as well. If you want to talk more about how we do the workshops, how she assesses those, she's available for conversation too. But in my opinion, this is permanent party focused, and that's what we describe our staff and faculty, the leader developers. And we've moved away from an open enrollment idea, which was basically a menu and dates, sign up for what you'd like. We had marginal success there, more to an on-demand. So a unit can say, come to our squadron, we're having issues in these kinds of things. Can you build an experience for us based on the expertise that you have? We're getting a lot more mileage with things like that. And I'm not going to talk about the Superintendent's Leader of Character Certificate for time, but please ask me a question about it. We also do a lot of research and scholarship. We publish the Journal for Character and Leadership Development right here. Our colleague, Mr. Heller, has a great article in there about the Coast Guard Character and Leadership Development process, which will supplement. Page 58, which will supplement whatever he's going to talk about today. So I commend that to you. We do that about 3 times a year. We have a resident scholar program, so it's people like General Miller, who all of you know is one of 3 senior scholars that our Academy Foundation Associate Graduates pays for to allow them to extend their service in a lot of powerful ways. And then I'm not going to talk about assessment, so I can turn it over to Adam and Sarah. All right, here's my last slide. And I'll build it. So this is the institutional commitment and service interest, and I know I'm out of time. Jim's given me the nonverbal. This is the last one. CCLD has never been in a more upward trajectory than right now. Every time our superintendent speaks, he talks about developing leaders of character as the Academy's prime directive. The Leader of Character framework was initially signed under him as the commandant, a 1-star back in 2011, and he's pleasantly surprised that it is still around, but now becoming the main thing with his vocal advocacy for it. So that's great. We are in the process of being elevated to mission element status. There will still be the main 3, the faculty department, the cadet wing, and the athletic department as the major mission elements. But in terms of conversation, in terms of corporate process presence, the Center for Character and Leadership Development will grow in stature, grow in its ability to impact curriculum and those experiences across the course of instruction, I think, for the betterment of our graduates. We recently produced a manual that talks about developing leaders of character at the Academy. It operationalizes the framework and allows permanent party, cadets, anybody who's at the institution visualize themselves in that instruction. And so that, I think, is going to be a tool to help us grow as well. And we feature prominently in our strategic plan. Goal number 1 of 4, there's only 4 goals, is all about culture of living honorably. There's objectives beneath it that speak to the framework specifically. That's given us a lot of institutional buy-in and backing from all the different lanes of cadet and permanent party activity to say this is important to the institution, and we're trying to assess progress in that regard too. And then last, it's got some legs. It's got some transportability. There's been interest, I think, from National Character and Leadership Symposium participants that the framework sells itself. Hopefully you got that vibe in the presentation as well. But ROTC students in particular have been attracted to the framework's applicability in their world, and we briefed it to over 40 detachments who have implemented it in variable degrees, and it will be part of the permanent curriculum at ROTC, at least on the Air Force side. And then in the next month or two, we're having similar meetings with Officer Training School. So all 3 Air Force sessions sources will be using the framework as how they speak to character and leadership development. With that, I will close. I appreciate your time and attention, and thanks for the opportunity.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So after that great explanation from Dr. Torkelson about our framework and everything, I'll talk a little bit more about how we assess and what types of tools that we use to assess the various programs that CCLD puts on. So I'll start with talking about a little bit of history of assessment. In the past, the Academy and the Center for Character and Leadership Development have assessed various types of character development in different ways. We used to have a survey about honor attitudes. That's since been discontinued. Currently, we ask, when the basic training cadets come through, we ask them about their attitudes towards lying, cheating, and stealing. We give them some scenarios to see how they would react or how acceptable they think that would be. And then recently, we've been looking at that data in comparison to honor code violations to kind of inform whether or not there's a preconceived bias or something influencing the frequency of honor code violations. The other thing that has been assessed by the Academy overall is our 9 institutional outcomes. So each outcome team is in charge of assessing their individual outcome on their own. But in addition to that, our survey department also does what they're calling the mission measures survey. This is a relatively new thing and an ongoing longitudinal process where when the cadets come through basic training, they're asked about their attitudes and feelings towards the 9 institutional outcomes. They're then asked about it again in a similar survey around their junior or senior year. And then they also touch point with them after they graduate. And when they graduate, they do a self-report. So up until then, it's self-report during basic training, self-report midway through their time at the Academy. And then after graduation, it turns into a kind of 360 type assessment where they do a self-report and their peers and supervisors also evaluate them as well. That's ongoing. We haven't seen many results from that yet, but that is an interesting one. And then from CCLD, we have tried to do a longitudinal type character virtue assessment. Overall, it has not been very successful for a number of reasons. One of them being the use of tools that aren't sensitive to that, like the VIA that's already been discussed by a couple of other panelists. And just a lack of participation from our cadets, which Sarah Wylie will discuss a little bit further in her portion. So at this point, we've kind of come back from it to stop looking at an overall general assessment of character virtues and start to hone in on some more particular aspects of virtue development. Going forward, now that we have this leader of character framework, we're really trying to use it as kind of a framework for assessment as well. We're trying to tie all of the assessments and research and data that we collect to the pillars of the leader of character framework, to use that as kind of a guiding light to really focus in on what we want to know. So currently CCLD is in the process of doing a bunch of different assessments. Like I said, we've pulled back from that overall kind of, how do you rate and honesty, integrity, all these different things, to focus in on a little bit more of the individual values, and to focus in on stuff that has been successful. Like I said, the overall character and leadership survey that we were conducting was not very successful. It wasn't very engaging, and the cadets were not getting a lot of feedback on their own ratings, and they weren't really seeing how it was impacting the academy. So we've been trying to pull that back, engage with the cadets a little bit more, and focus in on some of the assessments that have been successful. And if you saw those, when you saw those pictures of our outdoor leadership complex, it looks pretty fun, right? So all of the assessments with our outdoor experiential education have been pretty successful because it's fun, engaging, and they really get to kind of be a part of it, and we get to collect data from them. The other thing we've been trying to do is look at outdoor recreation education with our permanent party as well. One of the programs that USAFA puts on is the Recharge for Resiliency program. So it's a program with first-term airmen that come through. They go through and get resiliency education and training, and then our outdoor recreation program takes them on an outdoor excursion. Skiing, mountain biking, rock climbing, lots of different things. And it changes with the seasons, of course, because we're out in Colorado. So in summer they go mountain biking, in winter they go skiing. And we're looking at resiliency and mindset development with that using a couple of different tools. That's currently ongoing. But again, we're leaning into this research with outdoor education as it's much more engaging, and we get a lot better feedback and data from those types of assessments. Following that, with our outdoor education program and those really cool towers and ropes course and all that great stuff, we're trying to look at ways to collect data not just with self-report. I know our colleagues at West Point were also discussing not fully relying on self-report. While it is important, we are trying to pull in different types of data to really triangulate and get a good picture, one, and two, to not have to give the cadets so many surveys that they have to fill out because, like I said before, participation hasn't been great, and people just don't like to take surveys, especially cadets. So one of the things that we're looking at is developing a trained observer form. There's a little sample of it up there that you can see. This is very much a draft version, but just to give you kind of an idea of what we're looking at, we want to train observers to go down to our outdoor leadership complex to observe and to rate participants on an individual basis and on team basis, and try to look at, how well is communication happening? Is teamwork happening? Do we see evidence of emotional intelligence, resiliency, those types of things. From the observer's perspective, again, we do need to do a little bit of self-report there to make some comparisons, but this takes a lot of the pressure off of the cadets to provide us all the data, and we can get data in other ways as well, and hopefully mitigate some of the cynicism towards survey taking. We've also had success with our summer programs. Again, it's an outdoor experiential program. The cadets seem to really like that, and so they're much more willing to give us good data on it. We've done some comparisons between the programs that we conduct at the academy and programs at other colleges. So every summer we send a handful of cadets to Colorado Mountain College to go through their outdoor experiential program. And we collect data on emotional intelligence, growth mindset, and teamwork, and we can kind of use that as a comparison group to compare the two programs to see which is better and maybe adopt some of the lessons learned from the Colorado Mountain College program into our own outdoor experiential programs. And then, like Dr. Torkelson talked about, we have our professional development programs, which include NCLS and all the different menu of classes that are taught by people like Dr. Hooper, who's in the audience. And with those, our assessments are more focused on what did you get out of it? Were the facilitators good? Did you learn something? Are you inspired to make a change to your behavior? What would you like to see more of? Those types of things. And so we do that especially with our programs, but even more of a deeper dive with the National Character and Leadership Symposium. So when everybody comes, they take a survey, talks about, which speakers were great, which class seminars did they like, was the time good, was it facilitated well, that sort of thing. But then we do a deeper dive with the cadets. So we take the cadets and pull them into focus groups, interviews, various types of qualitative assessment to see, let's get down to the meat and bones of why is this event so important to the cadets? Like Dr. Torkelson said, it's in the top 3 of the most valued experiences at the Academy. And so we take that data, combine it with the kind of overall data that we get from the survey after the event to really do a deep dive into how impactful is the National Character and Leadership Symposium. And we do something similar with our professional development opportunities that the permanent party go through. So what we want to do to kind of take the next step toward making assessment much better is to do a deeper dive into how do these programs impact skills and how do these programs impact overall how you behave while at the academy. So some of the types of things that we're trying to do is every 6 to 12 months, we're reevaluating our assessments. Are we asking the right questions? Do these questions measure the things that we want them to measure? Are there tools out there that we could use that are better than what we have? And so we reevaluate every so often. Again, we're trying to get at the more triangulated assessments, combining self-report, peer review, follow-ups, so pre and post type surveys, to see, you took this class on emotional intelligence 6 months ago. How's your emotional intelligence now? Do you think, was the class successful? Would you like a follow-on to the class? That sort of thing. Again, talking about the outdoor experiential education, constantly updating that, coming up with new ways to assess it like the observer rating scale, and just really get at all angles of assessment. I'll skip that last one. So for this next one, I'm going to have Ms. Sarah Wylie come up and talk about survey participation and enhancing that.
Hello. For the sake of time, I'm going to try to speed this up a little because I want to give everybody a chance. As Adam mostly talked about, our survey response levels are at a historical low. They've been dropping over the last few years, and we're seeing this in all the service academies. It's not just us. Our survey response rates are in the single digits, like 9%, 8%. And when it gets to this, if you know statistics, it really is questioning our validity. Who's responding to the surveys? Are we getting a representative sample? So we have to take all these results sort of with a grain of salt because we're not getting enough people to respond to this. We're only getting a small percentage. So cadets are over-surveyed, as he mentioned. They're sick of taking surveys, their time is precious, and they're given very little incentive to do it. They might be ordered to do it, but in that case, we see the required fields filled out, and then the survey's blank. They don't bother, or they just go through and randomly answer questions, or they said about before, answer 5 to everything. We're just going to get through this as quickly as possible. So we want to try to find a way to get not just more responses, but more quality responses. We want to get the cadets to actually care about these surveys, and that's the question of the day. How do we do that? So how do we get away from purely self-reported data? Yes, it's important, it's valuable, but you also have this social desirability response, which especially in morality data, of course stealing's wrong, of course cheating is wrong, but the way they're reporting that on their self-report isn't necessarily reflected in their behavior. So we want to find more ways to, as Adam was talking about, triangulate the data, get more than just a self-report through observations, through commander reports, through peer reports, and we're still exploring this. We're still in the talking about it and brainstorming stage. So one of the problems we get is we're not allowed to offer them any incentives with monetary value. This includes even giving them pizza for attending a focus group. So how do we get them to participate if they're not incentivized to do it? How many of you have gotten an email with a survey in it and said, yeah, I'll get to that later? How many of you actually go back and answer that survey? Nobody, right? Even I, who know the importance of filling out these surveys, am guilty of that. So we've got to get this engagement, we've got to get ownership in this process, because especially when we interview someone right after the event, they say, oh yeah, it inspired me, it's impactful, but 6 months later we want to know, are you following up on it? Is it still impacting your life? Did you actually make these changes you were inspired to do? And it's those surveys we are not getting responses for, because 6 months later, it's in their email, they don't care. So we need to come up with a way to add some incentives. So one idea that we have that we are in the brainstorming and research stage for is to develop some sort of app that can be used across the academy. So idealistically, a cadet would open up the app, they would have a username and password, there would be a link to all the surveys that they could answer. They could click on that link and fill it out. And that way we could track cadet participation against multiple surveys over time. We could take their character survey that they take when they first enter and compare it to results in their senior year and see if there's any sort of predictive value to that. So we're looking into that. Any assessor, any researcher at the academy could put their link to their questions into this app, and cadets could access it. And then the researcher, when they're done, could download their results from the app. And based on what we heard yesterday, it'd be great to put in some sort of instantaneous feedback. When the cadet takes the survey, they instantly get to see how they did on it and what happened. So a way to help with the engagement is through gamification. Has anyone heard of gamification? It's a more and more popular thing. It's just adding game elements to everyday activities. It's a passion of mine. I've done a lot of research on it. If you want to know about it, there's a great book called Reality is Broken by Jane McGonigal. She sort of spearheaded this gamification movement. So we're looking into that. Research shows that gamification can improve engagement. It can improve ownership, internal motivation, or intrinsic motivation, and even your persistence. They've done studies where an online activity, one group gets no points, nothing. The other group just gets arbitrary points. They don't mean anything. You don't get to take these points with you. But the group that had the points were more persistent at the app. They played it longer. They tried it more times. So these completely digital, arbitrary measures really improve engagement. And so we're looking for ways to do that. One way might be digital badging. If you've ever played a game or been online where they're like, you got an achievement. Has everyone seen these sort of things? Those might be digital badges. So we might be able to do that like you're at the bronze level or silver level or gold level, or they get achievements for completing surveys or participating in research. There'd also be virtual incentives. They don't have to mean anything. We get a reward center in our brain light up. Even when we get these digital rewards, even if it's just a sound effect or a graphic, our brains love it. And a lot of studies have shown that even a virtual reward can be more incentivizing than a physical reward. It's crazy. It's the way our brains work. I love gamification. And I will talk your ear off about it anytime. So we're looking at ways to incorporate that into our survey process to give the cadets more incentives to participate and maybe even more ownership in the research process. And if we do it this way and can collect their email addresses, then we could even offer to send them the results of the research when it's concluded so they can see how they were able to make a contribution to our research. So this is something that's our future. We're hoping to research and propose and implement this within the next few years. So it would just be a one-stop shop for researchers and cadets all over the academy to participate and maybe even take it to the ROTC and other groups. So that's all I have, and I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Heller.
All right, I just need to negotiate with my moderator. Like, what are we doing on time? Go ahead and take the 15 minutes. All right, sounds good. In the as the old school child asked Hillel, tell me everything there is to know about the Torah while standing on one leg. And he said, that which you find unkind, do not do to your fellow man. And the rest of it is commentary. So I will try to be really quick similarly. What I would say, the takeaways from what we've done at the Coast Guard Academy is at our Division III scale with less than 1,100 cadets, we've been able to integrate across the entire enterprise, across the Coast Guard at large. We're aligned with Coast Guard policy, Coast Guard competencies, the Coast Guard's Leadership Training Center, we've been able to align internal to the Commandant of Cadets, the Dean of the Provost of Academics, and the Athletic Director. So when we started this journey, bless you, when we started this journey about 6 years ago, I got 3 core principles along those lines. My Commandant of Cadets said, don't do anything new. The Dean of Academics said, don't make it another piece of paper. And the athletic director said, don't take my coaches out of stride. So I think we've done that with what I'm going to give you a little bit of commentary on about the leader development program that we've built. And There we go. I'm clicking buttons. So all greetings and salutations, by the way, remain in effect. I absolutely am privileged to be on this panel with our Air Force Academy brethren. That model I absolutely love, own, engage, and practice. And then the other one of live, lift, elevate. I absolutely love how they've done that theoretically. Ours is very, very similar. Our institute was founded by Jim Tyler, with his a member of the class of '58 who doesn't graduate, but he has donated all this philanthropy and vision to us over these 15 or so years, because he said what happened to him on the banks of the Thames in his first 120 weeks of the 200-week experience was so foundational to how he showed up and made his life. So that's who we are. We have a very similar mission set. And you got to go this way, I guess that's the problem. Okay, so we are getting trained as we go. And so, I'm going to explain this a little bit about what we did. In short, we've created this Coast Guard Academy Leader Development Program that's experienced by all cadets, not some cadets, all cadets, through a series of core programs. Each cadet is on their own developmental journeys they go through there, but we said, how can we get our hands around this with core programs that every cadet goes through? And so we said, well, there are about 9 of them, 9 experiential ones and a behavioral course or 2 that we could say every cadet goes through. And by the way, at our school, Division III, 3/4 of them are competing at the NCAA Division III level. 3/4 of them when you add the competitive sports like rugby and hockey. So athletics is integral to how we're developing leaders of character here, not peripheral. So, and we link them into the Coast Guard's competencies. This is our basic model. I'll be honest, I like Air Forces better, but this is what we do. But we have the Guide to Officer and Leader Development, which you can't skip over. That is a philosophy. All the service academies came up with this shift from a compliance-based mentality to one of individual development, circa 2000. Back in our day, those of us that are of a certain age there, General Miller, the attrition rate, attrition was the mission. Look, you'd show up on reporting in day and look to the left, look to the right. Neither of them will be there when you graduate, right? And we still say that same front end, but the punchline is different. Now we say, welcome aboard, look to the left, look to the right. These are the best friends you're ever going to have in this world, and they will attend your weddings and your funerals, and you haven't even met yet. Our retention rates across the board are up in the 89% across all the service academies, and it's because of this shift in philosophy. West Point they built CLEDS, the Cadet Leader Development System, and we search edited, replaced, and changed the academy name on that, and we decided to have the model of officer and leader development, but of course that would be, that ain't so good, right? Mold. So we decided to change the model to guide. We use our strategy there, which the challenge, support, assess is similar there when you say learn from theory, experience through practice, analyze, use reflection, and deepen understanding through mentoring. So, theory, experience, reflection, mentoring. When we go to CCLD and events like that, that is the theory. Somebody else's experience becomes your theory, but then you have to do it. As we learned yesterday, that can all be, you can get that wisdom theoretically, but it's through the practice, through the habituation that you need to really get this to sink in. And of course, it's over time and all the whole person development. On the right are the Coast Guard's competencies, leading self, leading others. They have 2 other buckets for the service, leading performance and change, and leading the Coast Guard, which is similar to live, lift, elevate. But that's how the Coast Guard does. And so we've integrated our curriculum around that. So what we did was we took those, it's a little bit of an eye chart, but all you need to know is those are the competencies on the columns. Those are the courses, the experiential courses, and the 2 academic courses that are experienced by all cadets. And we said, we're going to do a curricular map. And our shield colors, I think West Point does the same. Don't you guys do the same colors where you have green for your 4th class? Maybe you don't. Green are our 4th class, and then it goes red, white, blue. Red are the 3rd degrees, white is the 2nd class, and blue is the firsties. So you could see in what we're doing is very specifically targeting a particular experience into a targeted competencies. We're going to do a deep dive on them, give them theories in there, have them experience it real time, step back and analyze and reflect across the 200 weeks. And so we built curriculum around there. What are we doing when they're in basic training? What are they doing on the 5 weeks on the 295-foot Cutter Eagle while they're in that role of the junior officer? So Eagle, has a whole handbook that says that what we're trying to do there is put them in the role of the junior enlisted, and their targeted competencies are going to be accountability, responsibility, and technical competence. So accountability, responsibility, it's the first time they qualify as that helmsman, that lookout, that auxiliary watchstander in the engine room. For 2 weeks, they're breaking in, getting qualified, and then when they finally get qualified after 2 weeks, the enlisted person shows up for the appointed watch, but there's a qualified cadet there. The enlisted person lays below, and the cadet is the helmsman, is the lookout, is responsible for the safe navigation of the unit. For that 4-hour stretch, they're responsible and accountable for that. And then, of course, technical proficiency on Eagle is about rigging. It's about forward and starboard and aft and port, and the nomenclature of the frames and the fittings and all that stuff that goes with life at sea. And then this is how it might show up on our Leadership 44s. We have 44-foot sailboats, just like Navy does. We send them all out for a 10-day sortie with call it a lieutenant, a junior officer. But the theory would be Tuckman's form, storm, norm, perform. We also, like the Royal Navy, use the DISC model. And by the way, I said we're integrated with the fleet. We use DISC across the service. So anybody going to our leadership courses from E5 to O10 should be familiar with that language, that DISC language. And so that'll be the theory, and they get that DISC in their third-class organizational behavior course. It's reinforced a couple times. It's reinforced there. So they're really using that across the enterprise. They would experience going through the rotational roles. Every day they change roles from cook to deckhand to the watch captain to the navigator. And then every day there's a debrief. It's not just about sailing A to B. It's how did we do? How can we do better next time? What were the points of friction? Where was the conflict? How did your DISC style show up? And then they have some deepening understanding through mentoring. They have that JO, junior officer, that they're with, giving them that feedback. And on the right, these are the guiding principles that I want our leader developers across the campus. We know, we all know that leader development happens through the leader developers. So what I want my faculty, staff, and coaches to do is place that weight of responsibility squarely on the cadet's shoulders. Whenever possible, take the time to explain the why. Tolerate above the waterline risk of failure. And those of us that are in the naval services all know that the cannonball going through the upper topgallant is not a big deal. You send the bosun, they stitch it up. Below the waterline, now you have flooding. So that becomes a bigger issue. So sexual assault, all that kind of stuff that we heard about from the Royal Navy below the waterline. We're not saying, well, the cadets are in charge, but if something happens for the little project they're assigned above the waterline, we allow them to learn from their mistakes. We want our faculty, staff, and coaches to initiate the frequent quality interaction, adult, speak to the higher angels. We want to then tailor the challenge, so challenge, support, assess. And we want to support that struggle. When they divest themselves of all symbols of cadet life after 200 weeks in residence on the third Wednesday in May, we want there to be tears, right, as they finish, as they graduate. But those tears ought to be tears of joy that they've crossed the finish line of the 26.2 mile marathon, not tears of I just got released from captivity. The tears look the same, but boy, do they feel different. So we want our faculty, staff, and coaches supporting that struggle. And don't make it easier for them. Don't make it a 19-mile marathon. Keep it a 26.2-mile marathon, but you need to be with them, supporting them. I'm not giving up on you, even when you may give up on yourself. It's the kind of mentality we want. And we think if that happens, and it's all grounded in Keegan's adult development, which West Point has in their doctrine, and DC and Ryan's self-determination theory, we think goodness is going to happen if that's the way we show up to immerse them in our sea of professionalism. So we aligned with the Coast Guard's evaluation system. On the right, it would, if you were a one-eyed man galloping by on a horse, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between a third-class cadet and an E5 enlisted evaluation system. It's a little bit different in there. We wrote a whole handbook about how to do that, but now we're having the cadets use the evaluation tool, the same one they're going to use when they get out into the fleet. And by the way, when we send our cadets to the fleet, the chief petty officer says, oh, I know what to do with this. This is just how I mark my E5. I'm going to mark you that way. We're using that tool for assessment. That is the number one tool we're using for assessment, right, wrong, or indifferent. We're using the performance feedback tool, the only performance feedback tool they will use when they're ensigns in the fleet. And so we're getting them practice in using that now. And of course, it's the same thing. The third class are valued in the fourth class, and the lieutenants, the company officers are valued in the firsties, that kind of thing. But we're using that tool. And then we have them, we survey them on how that experience is growing them as a leader. We ask them to survey, did you have the opportunity during their cadre experience, their detailer experience, to deepen their understanding by the chief, year-over-year comparisons. That picture there, that young lady with the ponytail on the far right, she might look like a cadet, but that's a chief petty officer. That's with her team in cadre. Their swabs are in the next room getting math training during basic training, and she's sitting there with a job aide asking them how they're growing as a leader, as a detailer, real time when they're in the moment. And we've digitized the system. So Toby Olson, my teammate down there in the third, fourth row, has digitized all these evaluation reports, and he can get a heat map as we've crosswalked the performance dimensions into these leadership competencies. And you can quickly see how your team is doing. You can disaggregate by gender, by ethnicity, by sport team, by cohort, by company, so we can do cross comparisons on all that on the information system. We have an annual cycle of assessment that team of the institutional research, the cadet training folks, all meet and do that and to continue to improve it. We've had to really enhance that role of the company officer. I won't go into the details, but in short, we've shifted them from doing a lot of collateral duties, a lot of administrative stuff, to we did a real study, shadowing them with clipboards and stopwatches for 4 days, and we're moving them from what they were doing 8% on true leader development, they're up to now about 30%, and we're continuing to improve there. There's a lot of goodness that's going on there about how we do leader development, train the trainers. Admiral Charlie Ray, our retired 4-star, who was our vice commandant, doing leader development in there for a cadet cadre group. I like this one up in the middle. You're seeing 3 sets of mentors going on. I just happened to catch them at the right moment at our cadet center. So you see the lieutenant commander with a second class. You see the other lieutenant commander with a second class. And you see Miss Ellen Metcalf, who was on our team, randomly assigned to that. That's a program that Toby runs. We have 1/3 of the Corps cadets opting into a mentor relationship with some other adult. We use alums. We use faculty, staff, and coaches, civilian, military. But it's a great program that they opt into. We pulled our faculty and staff together. For 5 years, we ran the Class 64 Leadership Workshop, where we gather. It's mandatory for all faculty, staff, and coaches to spend a day on these topics as we've sharpened their saw. So I'm going to train you to use your QR reader here at this point. We are not alone. There's a call to action that Tom Kolditz has made. He was the behavioral science department head at West Point. Then he went to run the Door Institute at Rice. He's written this book, Leadership Reckoning. The QR code, if you get your phones out, the one on the left will get you to a podcast. It's a 45-minute podcast. This one's from Spotify, but you can find it on Apple. But that'll get you to his book. The one on the right, I'm sorry about that, that'll get you to his book. The one on the right is the podcast, about 45 minutes from Tom, telling there's a call to action among higher ed. 80%, Gallup polls show 70-80% of the people refinance their homes to send their kids to college to become better leaders. They're not just getting the congressional appointment to do that. They're going to URI. They're going to to University of South Carolina. They're going to college to become better leaders. And he says that most of the efforts are being done by well-intended but untrained volunteers, and they're doing things like trust falls and staff rides and doing s'mores. He says we could do better. In short, he really likes the value of coaching, which our mentor program does. We take a coach approach to mentoring, but there's a lot of ways you can do it. And then part of that is there are actually over 140 schools that are endeavoring to do just this, to lean into the Carnegie Foundation's elective classification for public purpose. There were 9 schools on the right that were part of the pilot that created the criteria that exercised that. We were one of 9. We were the only service academy. But the other service academies have been along for the ride for us, and I guarantee you we will not be the only one. We've been the 4 of us have all been talking quite a bit, and I think all 4 of us are going to apply to this thing. But it's really saying this is leadership development is part of the institutional identity of the school, and certainly for these schools of ours, it's in there. But there's 140, I think, schools. They expect to have 100 applications for the first cohort. You have to initiate by July and submit by December. But it's a good self-reflection thing. That QR code will get you to the Carnegie Foundation's website on there. And that is, speaking of QR codes, now that you've all exercised that QR code reader, this one's for our leadership conference coming up on October 18 and 19 at the Coast Guard Academy. No promises, but we're trying to coordinate that where we're doing some event on Eagle. We might be able to get underway on those Leadership 44s as an opt-in, not a requirement. But sign up on that to get onto our mailing list. I've got business cards on the table outside, along with a brochure that describes our program in a little bit of detail. I'm at 90 seconds over, but I'm gonna make it call an audible and give the first question to Admiral Ray. Admiral Ray, the question is to you, sir. Do you have, from your perspective, how do you see from the 10,000 foot, the 010 level view, while I just did the hip bones connected to the thigh bone, what commentary do you have for the good of the order, sir?
John, well, we're not going to drag this on. What I see that is so powerful about the program y'all have created there is it's based on service standards. It's not some academy thing. It's based on Coast Guard standards. It's accepted across the academy, academics, athletics, military. Everybody understands the framework. And at the end of the day, the cadets go through 9 experiential programs over the course of their 4 years. And the probability of success of them being ready to lead at the division level, which in naval services, that's a group of 10 to 12 young folks that are serving. So it's just through the roof compared to what we did in days gone by. So
Thank you, sir. I yield the balance of the time.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you may have noticed that I'm doing Marcel and Ed is doing Marceau as we try to figure out what's going on. The salad is getting cold right now, so we're going to have to cut it off. But please, let's give our panel here the applause they deserve.
Just stay here for a second.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, we're going to lunch now, and you'll have time during lunch to ask the panelists questions if you had them, which I'm sure you do. But before we break, very quickly, Colonel Jim Cook has been the head of the Department of Philosophy at the Naval Academy, or I'm sorry, the Air Force Academy, for a number of years, and he is retiring soon, right?
Soonish.
Oh, soonish, okay. So I just wanted to recognize that. He has been a leader within the military ethics community for a number of years. He's been the head of the Department of Philosophy. He's been the co-editor of the Journal of Military Ethics, right, for about, 5-6 years?
That gives my role too much credit, Henrik.
Well, Henrik just left, but no, you do a lot of lifting. He's published, he's deployed, he's started a religious studies minor since he's been there. And also, I think he's created a culture within the military ethics community which is very rigorous but also humane, just through his being himself, his kindness, his generosity, and his humor. So I just wanted to recognize the fact that he is such a leader in this field, and he'll, I'm sure, continue to be part of it. But thank you for everything you've done in that role.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great. Okay, and time for lunch upstairs.